Power on.
Real-time Sovryn is go.
Ooh, the Golden Stallion, the man of tomorrow, Savzu, the rated R radio star, here with you for another little real-time Sovryn, in which I am going to be reviewing a movie that I think is getting kind of a short shrift. I'm a little disappointed at the reaction to it, even though some of it I feel is justified. But I'm a little blown away at some points that just seem to never get brought up, by other commentators, YouTubers, and whatever else. And just to make sure people know, yes, the strikes have been lifted off of YouTube. As insane as those are, that you can get those, especially for content that you did like a decade ago, right? Like, like you can get punished for who you were. I'm not the same person I was 10 years ago. Nobody's the same person they were 10 years ago. If they are, something's going on, something's wrong. But regardless, to be retroactively held so accountable, I think is absolutely batshit insane. But here we are. And the video is available once again on YouTube. Of course, video episodes are also being uploaded to Spotify, which, I want to take a second on this because I actually listened to an interview with Jack Comte, who is the founder of Patreon, which, of course, I still have a Patreon. Where people can, where people still regularly, have a subscription / donate, all of that stuff. And Patreon has certainly been making some interesting moves over the past year of 2024. And now that we're in 2025. Anyway, don't want to get too lost on that. Okay. But you're, of course, always welcome to go to patreon.com/Sovryn. And, you can donate to the show. Or actually, before I get into what I was about to say about video on Spotify or video in general, I'm really excited because just as we are back on YouTube, the latest incarnation of the BDSM studio is getting very, very close to completion. In fact, you might be seeing, if you're watching the video, you may be seeing a new microphone here. And if I sound a little extra creamy, that's because I am back to the microphone that, I guess I could argue made me famous. It was a microphone that I used for years on every show that I did. And of course that's the Shure microphone, and it's their latest model. And all of this is thanks to fundraiser.sovryntech.com and to the generous offerings of, listeners of the show, friends, and so on. And, I'm so grateful for it. So if we are so close to where, like right now, you can't see it. I actually mounted this camera. There's going to be a second camera. But I can have actually 2 other guests in the studio. This is a first. So it's me here, but then on the other side of the studio desk, there's 2 more microphones available for people. And are we going to be having some 3-way podcast action? Oh, you better believe it. Okay. And Starlink is working pretty well, so I can get back to doing guest episodes. Again, I don't want to get too lost in the shop talk. Okay. But fundraiser.sovryntech.com. If you want to continue helping the show, believe me, you're going to be blown away by the content. Not that's just going to get made, but that's going to be possible now because of all the new tech that has come in. And there's still more to go, and you can help with that, fundraiser.sovryntech.com. Okay, so maybe I'll make that little text show up in the video. But speaking of video, it was interesting to hear. I've felt this way for a while, but Jack Comte kind of put it into, is it Comte? Anyway, whatever. He put it into, no disrespect to him in that regard. He put it into perspective. He brought it up in the interview. There was discussion around this, that actually the person interviewing him, I think, is who brought it up. But the idea that nobody actually really wants to watch like video podcast, but because Spotify and YouTube push for it so much, they make you think that it matters. And because they make it a part of, you getting favored in the algorithm. They make you think that it matters, when maybe video podcasts really don't. And I mean, this is the thing. Yes, there are some podcasts that I do watch on video, and I do know some people who I just, love all the way, who definitely prefer the convenience of finding something on YouTube, and just watching the video or whatever, even if it's just, kind of like the setup that I have right now, where, I mean, again, the studio is still getting finished up for 2025, but we got just such killer stuff going on. To where I'm more looking at my computer screen on my laptop, necessarily than I am at the camera and so on, even though, there's some action going on. There's screens actually everywhere in here right now. You can't see them yet just because all the cameras aren't set up. But anyway, yeah, I mean, and you can let me know in the comments. Let me know in the YouTube comments or in the Spotify comments. Okay. Cause there's video on Spotify as well now. But you let me know, like, does video really matter that much to you? Is it that big of a deal? I'd like to get your gauge on this. I feel like most people, not all, I know there's people who I respect, to the top tier, that do prefer finding things on YouTube. But then I think part of the reason they like finding things on YouTube is just because, again, the convenience factor, right? It's just easier for it to come up on YouTube for them. As to where podcast apps really can be quite convoluted for sure. Like I can definitely understand that perspective. Yeah, I don't know. I'm intrigued to hear from people on their thoughts on that. But regardless, we're doing video, and certainly the video will be a lot more interesting. Again, when we have the multi-camera setup, and one of those cameras is like, looking on my wife's skirt or something. I mean, you never know what happens around here, because we also do have another rebrand going on for 2025 that I'm actually really, really excited about. It was a brilliant idea, and I can't believe nobody's done it yet, but we're going to do it. So, okay. All of that said, let's talk about what I came here to talk about. The movie that, like I said, I feel is getting a short shrift. And there might be parts of this where you want to see the video, because I might do a little show and tell, is Lord of the Rings, War of the Rohirrim. And I want to say it's pronounced Rohirrim, right? So this is, let me say this right up front. Okay. This movie came out December 13th, 2024. Mrs. Sovryn and Rob Freebeard and myself, we all went opening weekend to go see it. Saw it in IMAX. Okay. Biggest screen we could find on Ice Planet Zero. And, we saw it that way, made sure we were getting the big experience, right? Okay. Because all three of us are pretty decent Lord of the Rings fans. I actually, my history with Lord of the Rings, the first time I had ever heard of it was, you used to get offers. This is when I was a teenager in the 90s. Okay. You used to get, you'd get whatever bullshit mail that you get in the mail, right? Ads and everything. But there used to be this very popular thing called the Science Fiction Book Club. And however, whether it was going to conventions or whatever it was, however it ended up in my mailbox, you could basically get like 6 books for $1. And that's how they hooked you. And then you paid full price, kind of each month going forward. And I did this. I was like, $6 for 6 books for $1? Hell yeah. And I got some amazing books. I got Orson Scott Card's Guide to Writing Science Fiction. I got what at the time was a decently comprehensive guide to science fiction television. That was really, really cool. I got the Star Wars, Stephen J. Sansweet's Star Wars Encyclopedia, which actually I have right over there because I consider that to be like the end cap of Star Wars goodness. It all stopped in 98, right? I talk about that 20-year run, basically 77 to 97, or really 98 when that encyclopedia came out. That encyclopedia carries all the good things and greatness that Star Wars did. After that, in my book these days, over. Who knew that book would be so important? But it was. And one of the other books that I got, there are a couple of, this is also how I discovered Laurel K. Hamilton and the Anita Blake novels, which are still arguably, in my opinion, one of the greatest book series of all time, especially vampire book series for sure. That was very, very enlightening, because that was like a book series. Trust me, I'm going to get to Lord of the Rings, but Anita Blake, Laura K. Hamilton's work was the work that, really got me to expand my mind into of different relationship styles. I talk a lot about how, my hero and one-time friend, and dearly missed, Harlan Ellison, how much he did for me. In many ways, Laura K. Hamilton did as well, because she really showed off, or basically gave an implicit permission. I mean, it's explicit works, but implicit permission, to think differently, about relationships at the time. And it was, that was very mind expanding for me when I was a teenager. But certainly just as mind expanding was the fact that I got the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy in this huge single volume hardback edition, from the Science Fiction Book Club for $1. How can you go wrong? And I read the shit out of that, especially when I found out, because I didn't start reading it right away, but then when I heard that Lord of the Rings was what, kind of what inspired J. Michael Straczynski in writing Babylon 5, like it was one of his influences. Well, then I was all over it. I mean, and of course there are many series that are true. That's true for, like, okay, what inspired J. Michael Straczynski to make Babylon 5? And you find out about the Lensman series from E. Doc Smith and so on. And of course I just gobbled all of that up. Okay. But Lord of the Rings is there, read it all. Holy shit. Mind blown. Right. In fact, mind so blown that when the movies by Peter Jackson through New Line Cinemas were getting developed, and the trailers even came out, I famously, when I'd go to the movies with my friends, and at the time in the 90s, we would go to the movies basically every weekend. Even if we were going to see a shit film, we were just going to the movies. And the movies were at the mall, and mall culture was everything in the 90s, right? And I miss those days for sure. Okay. But sometimes I get to explore that mall culture with my brother, Robin Freebeard. But anyway, when we'd see the trailers, like I would boo them because, I didn't think that the movies could possibly do the books justice. And it turns out the movies actually ended up doing incredibly well. And I became quite the fan, and I absolutely love, the extended editions of these. I mean, give me 5-hour Lord of the Rings films all day long. Now, as far as we know, we're not getting any kind of extended edition of War of the Rohirrim in any way. It's already been released at home. But anyway, we're going to get into that. Okay. But that's the thing is, Lord of the Rings, like I've been a fan for quite some time. And I still love, exploring like the later works by authors. Fortunately, with Lord of the Rings, like Christopher Tolkien never did anything disrespectful in the way, say, that Brian Herbert did to his daddy's Dune books. But in general, like anybody who's taken on the mantle of writing Lord of the Rings stuff has done a good job, and it hasn't been disrespectful, and it's generally come out. You can see where it has come out of J.R.R. Tolkien's notes, right? And War of the Rohirrim is one of those cases where, there is this story of the king known as Helm Hammerhand, this fortress that is a major part of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. You find out it was named after him, and that being, Helm's Deep, and which of course gets featured in the Battle of Hornburg. So, really what you're getting here with this movie, okay, is the story. I'm not going to recount the whole story here for you. Okay. But it's the story of how in some ways, how Helm's Deep got its name. Okay. And, the animation, I mean, people want to complain a little bit about the mixture of CGI and hand-drawn animation, kind of, somewhat of its anime style. Of course, it was directed by Kenji Kamiyama, which Kamiyama-san, of course, is known best for his work, fantastic work, with Ghost in the Shell standalone complex. So you're bringing in somebody who really knows what they're doing. I mean, yes, there's points where the animation might come off a little rough, but overall, it worked for me. It was okay. Something I wanted to get out right out front, and I'll say this now, okay, is 100% the reason War of the Rohirrim got made is so that New Line Cinemas can keep the rights to The Lord of the Rings. And and wait, what is Amazon doing? That's a totally separate subject. Okay. Totally separate rights holdings. I mean, there's a reason that the show, Rings of Power is kind of odd in what it can explore, because New Line Cinemas in general, controls a lot of the content that makes up Lord of the Rings. So is this a play to, keep the rights? Yes. It's just like when Warren Beatty will do some kind of weird Dick Tracy special on TV where he's pretending to be Dick Tracy, but also being Warren Beatty on a Zoom call at the same time. And it's just so that Warren Beatty can keep the rights to the character. Same concept. 100% that's why this got made. Now, does that mean that it's inherently a bad film? No. These kinds of rights plays get done all the time. Okay. And sometimes you end up with good stuff. Other times you end up with pure shit. Other times you end up even with things that might not even get released. I mean, it's a wacky world, especially in Hollywood today. But to talk about this film, do I think that it was a bad film? Which it seems like that's what most people are putting out there. They're either saying it's bad or that it's just pointless. No, I'm not going to say either. I mean, I'd lean more towards the pointless, because did this change my life in any way? As to where maybe, seeing Lord of the Rings, the film versions of it were just so incredible and so enjoyable, including The Hobbit as well, which I also don't understand the hate that those films get, because I thought they were incredible. The whole trilogy, the extended editions, fucking insane. I mean, like, in many ways, I feel like those were like the last kind of classical Hollywood films being produced, before everything became, streaming first and, a smaller screen and all of that. I thought the Hobbit trilogy was stunning. Such a great time. Mrs. Sovryn and I actually watched it recently, and I mean, we were both just grinning ear to ear watching it the whole time, because it was such a great adventure. So this is nowhere near War of the Rohirrim, or Rohirrim, sorry. I'm pretty sure that's how that's pronounced. Not how it's spelled, but it's how it's pronounced. It doesn't live up to those scales by any stretch of the imagination. It just does not do that. However, and this is the point that I think a lot of people are really, really missing with it. Okay. And there's other things I'm going to get into, but the point that I think it's really missing, or that people are missing, is if you go back and watch the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings films, especially the Two Towers, where Helm's Deep, a lot of it takes place at Helm's Deep there. I mean, it does as well for Return of the King, but when they start to, because what this movie did, it really explored like so many aspects of Helm's Deep. And when you watch Peter Jackson's movies and you're at Helm's Deep and they're talking about, oh, there's a cavern that people can escape to, or there's this and that, all these different features of it. Like, now you actually have a mental image, and you have some mythology or lore, if you want to call it that, or history, perhaps, within the universe itself, that you can now visualize what they're talking about and what the dangers are that they're going through at Helm's Deep. And for me, it actually makes it kind of worth it, because again, now you just have so much more context of this major battleground in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Now, again, are you perfectly fine without ever seeing this movie? Oh, of course you are. So in that regard, you could kind of call it pointless. Okay. But I think the one thing this movie does do is it gives you a lot of color in so many things that they are talking about, and I think there's some, George Lucas has that famous saying for, that within Star Wars, that everything is poetry. It rhymes, right? Like things are supposed to, even if they're not exactly the same, it's poetry in the sense that it kind of repeats itself, like history repeats itself. And to have a giant battle, that occurred, 200 years previous, okay, that is somewhat akin to, the battle that occurs in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, you do get kind of that poetry. Also, you get a better understanding, and this is maybe even more important than having context for Helm's Deep itself, but you get a better understanding of like the hill people, the wild people in the hills, who they're not a bit part, and they look really mean and vicious in Peter Jackson's movies, but then now you get to understand where they're coming from and just why there is this concern around them because of what they had done, however many decades or centuries previous to the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And so for that, I do think it adds color to the trilogy. And I think for a lot of people who went and saw this movie, I don't think that they've watched Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy in a long time. Because if they watch those movies again, I think they would come to the same conclusion that I did, that, wow, this really adds a lot to what's happening in that trilogy overall. But that said, that's kind of the main positive and the one thing to take away from it, because otherwise, admittedly, it's kind of rote. The story itself is not terribly unique. And admittedly, one of the things that I always look for, especially in a franchise in franchise content, if I'm to call it that, is, okay, did this story being told, say, for example, War of the Rohirrim, does this story need to be told in Lord of the Rings? Is it taking advantage of the unique aspects of Lord of the Rings? Or could this story be told anywhere and it doesn't really matter? This is unfortunately one of those cases where this story could have been told in any universe. It didn't really take advantage of unique aspects of the Lord of the Rings universe. Yes, there's the Great Eagles, okay, which are kind of unique. You sort of get that, but it's just not there. And believe me, Lord of the Rings is far from the most egregious example of this. In fact, it's really the one time I've heard a story or seen a story, experienced a story in the Lord of the Rings universe that didn't take advantage of it. So I give it a little bit of a pass on that, because boy, when you look at some of the shit that gets made for Star Trek and Star Wars, especially in the past, 10 years or longer, a lot of this stuff does not need to be in Star Wars, right? Like the Canto Bight novel, there's so many things that, well, this could have been written in any universe. Why the fuck should I read this? I'm here for Star Wars, for what Star Wars uniquely delivers to me. I don't give a shit about some run-of-the-mill story, right? And that's annoying. But those are egregious cases, as to where this one, not as egregious. So I give it a little bit of a pass on that. Okay. Did they make up some characters, or not make them up, but like create their own backstory and stuff that was not within Tolkien's notes? Yes, that occurred, right? Like, the main character, who do you consider the main character? Is it Helm Hammerhand? Is it, Hera, right? Who is Helm Hammerhand's daughter, who ends up kind of becoming a big deal. And they sort of set it up to where I think there could be other movies around Hera. I don't know if we're necessarily going to get that, because as far as I can tell, this movie bombed. It's already, after like 2 weeks, it was already on streaming services. Physical release has not happened yet, but it's already been on streaming services. I don't know that that's necessarily going to happen, but anything that they added, I don't think they did anything egregious. And part of the reason that they couldn't do anything egregious is really they didn't take advantage of the Lord of the Rings aspects. And maybe that's why, I don't know. But at the end of it, spoiler alerts, folks. Okay. It's already out there though. At the end of it, fine. You get Sauron for a second, voiced by, posthumously voiced by Christopher Lee. You get a mention of Gandalf, right? You get these little things at the end. And believe me, I hate that. Okay. It's just like with Star Wars with the Acolyte, Where, oh yeah, oh, Darth Plagueis shows up for 45 seconds at the very end of the goddamn series. No. He should have been in the beginning, should have been through the whole thing. Don't give us this little tease at the end to try and go and make fanboys go, oh, especially when the Acolyte is not getting a season 2. Thanks, Satan. Okay, but regardless, I hate that. Like, oh yeah, you make it attached to the universe just at the very end. So many novels do this, movies, TV series, so many things do this. So that way that the lazy ass writer or director, and I'm not saying that there is lazy ass writers or directors here necessarily. Okay. Certainly not the director, but so they can, just basically tell whatever fucking story they want to tell and get away with it. And then at the end, oh yeah, no, see, it is Lord of the Rings because, Saruman, not Sauron, is here, right? It's crazy. So all of that said, like that part annoyed me. You get orcs for like 5 minutes. You get some mention of, the fact that they're looking for the ring and, like very brief stuff. And it's like, no, I really want you, like, take advantage of the Lord of the Rings universe. But they didn't. And interestingly, because they didn't, it also doesn't come off as necessarily offensive to the canon. So it's a plus and a minus, I suppose. Okay. Now, speaking of that, we also run into the situation where, because it is mostly a human story, there's not a whole lot added. I mean, one of the things I love with a lot of movies today, this used to be such an exceptionally rare thing in the 90s, where we were so lucky to get like the Star Trek Encyclopedia or the Star Trek Chronology or the aforementioned Star Wars Encyclopedia or the Star Wars Essential Guides or whatever, or you had like the Aliens Colonial Marines Manual, which is still one of the coolest books ever written, where it's these like in-universe guides, right? We did get one for War of the Rohirrim. In fact, let me get up. I'll grab it here in the studio. We got the big shelf, which nobody ever really sees. And maybe you can't even hear me saying that. I was just saying that I was grabbing off of the big shelf. The shelf of books that nobody gets to see, because I'd hate for people to see how crazy I am. But anyway, here is this from Insight Editions? They seem to do all these things. No, maybe not. Anyway, whatever. Here is the official visual companion for War of the Rohirrim. And I don't know if you can really tell, this is an incredibly small book. I mean, this is super small. How many pages are we looking at here? Let's see. About 87 pages. So probably about 90 pages total. And I mean, it really just, it just doesn't tell much. Actually, here's the main villain from the movie, Wolf. You get some on him, but it's not anything super detailed. It's Haleth, and it basically all looks like this. And so, again, there's not a lot to tell here. And, maybe that's on purpose. Just because they wanted to be really careful with the canon. And again, they were also we have to keep in mind, as much as I don't want to, but we have to keep in mind, this was completely made. There is no doubt in my mind. There's no doubt in a lot of people's minds. And in fact, there's almost official confirmation of this, that this movie was totally made for as little money as possible, just so that New Line Cinemas could keep the rights to Lord of the Rings, so that, somewhere in the future they want to make a movie. I mean, it's doubtful they're ever going to get the rights for the Silmarillion. It seems like the Tolkien estate is holding on to that for dear life. Maybe when they need, I don't know, when they need a few $1 billion in the future, they'll finally sell that off. But yeah, we've got to keep that in mind, that this was a contract play ultimately. But does that make that a bad movie? No. Does it make it something that I would watch more than once? Yeah. No, I wouldn't watch it more than once. Getting the one-off is really enough. There's not a whole lot you're going to like really pick apart from this. And I mean, if there was that much, that visual companion that I just showed you would have a lot more detail in it. right? I mean, it's a beautiful little book. I'm not necessarily complaining about it. And the only reason I have it, I don't have it to keep it. This is just to get scanned, and then made available digitally. But yeah, it'd be a bigger book if this was a movie that had more meat to it, and I could admit that. But at the same time, is it worth at least a single watch? Yeah, because, I know a lot of people who have the tradition of, remember, the Lord of the Rings movies, that was those were like Christmas releases, and huge, right? Massive releases. And I know a lot of people that still have like the Christmas tradition or the holidays tradition of watching the Lord of the Rings trilogy again. And I do think this movie adds so much to, just context, just, mental context to what's being talked about, in the Two Towers and what's happening, especially in that movie, even though, certainly in the entire trilogy, there's some context. I don't want to say it necessarily does anything for The Hobbit, but for the Lord of the Rings trilogy, yeah, there's some aspects of that. Okay. Now, another thing that I think, and I want to cap this off with this conversation. Okay. There are, a lot of people that rip on, rip on new movies. Okay. I think something that a lot of people are missing is I was listening to an interview with Paul Stanley, and they were asking Paul Stanley, like, are you interested in, of course they sold off the rights to Kiss, Paul and Gene Simmons, they sold off the rights to Kiss pretty much. And they were being asked, like, would you ever be interested? How involved would you be in an autobiography film, or not an autobiography, but a biographical film of Kiss? And I would certainly love to see that myself. But Paul Stanley was basically, and they asked him, like, who would you want to play Paul Stanley, yourself? Who would you want to play this character, whatever, or this person? And Paul Stanley had a great insight, which he often does. He, not always, but he had a great insight in that he said, he's like, look, it's a whole new generation of actors. I don't know any of the actors today. It's going to be people that I have no idea who they are. So I don't really, care. Or he basically said, I don't really have a say in that. Like I wouldn't know. And it's a very honest answer, but I thought about that and I was like, yeah, I don't, which is a weird thing for me this is a very strange thing for me to admit, because I am such a cinephile, in fact, I'm so well known for my knowledge of entertainment overall. I don't fucking know the new generation of actors at all. I don't, and to some degree it's because, like, you don't get actors, I mean, like Matt Damon came out a few years ago famously and said how there's no more leading men in Hollywood and all this. And aside from the conversation around what leading men means and blah, 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 patriarchy, yep. Okay. But okay, the point stands that yes, you don't have comparable Sylvester Stallones anymore. You don't really have comparable Arnold Schwarzeneggers anymore. I mean, you just don't have, like these kinds of actors. And part of the reason for that is, like, just things are produced differently now. Like Netflix is just buying Canadian actors largely. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I love Canadian actors. They've been a part of some of the greatest science fiction fucking ever. Okay. David Hewlett. Woo. Let's go. Call him, Rodney. Anyway. So, but that's the thing, is like, you don't, like, the acting profession is a very different beast now. And you don't really have a lot of those marquee names, but not only that, like, you can't watch everything that's going on. And so, like, the available actors that are out there, you can't really keep track of them anymore. As to where, if the year was like 1999 or hell, even like 2005 or 2010, like, I could probably rattle off. I could literally rattle off hundreds of actors' names. I could do it right now. But as far as who are the big names today, I don't have any fucking clue. Like, I just don't know. And I think most people are, like, if I'm not keeping track, I have a hard time believing that other people keep track that way and know. And so the reason I'm bringing this up is I think part of the reasons that, or one of the reasons that movies today don't seem to have the same punch and impact or mean as much to you, the viewer, as they did then, is you're not really invested in even in the people who are playing things. Like in the 90s and before, or even into the aughts and previous and decades previous, you know, if Harrison Ford's in a movie, you're going to go see it. Why? Because it's Harrison Ford. You don't have any idea what the story could be about. I mean, you might have some idea from the trailer, maybe, but like, oh, it's a Harrison Ford flick. I'll go watch that, right? Or pick your actor who you would do that for. And that's not really a thing anymore. I mean, I look at the cast list, you know, when I was watching the movie, I didn't really recognize any of the voices in War of the Rohirrim. I didn't know, you know, I mean, when I look at the cast list, I'm like, okay, yeah, I know who Brian Cox is. Of course, he's been around forever, very famous. And I know Miranda Otto, who, you know, played Éowyn in the original Lord of the Rings trilogy. And she, you know, she's like narrating the film more or less. So like, yeah, I know them, but you look, and it's a small, you know, to be sure, it's a very small cast, but I look at the rest of it and I'm like, I don't know who these people are. I don't have any goddamn idea, you know, and I didn't instantly recognize Brian Cox's voice by any means, or Miranda Otto's for that matter. Okay. Because even in a world of, you know, decently big names, they're not like the biggest names, even though I know Brian Cox has been involved in recent TV series that have been considered some of the greatest shows ever. Like I know, okay. It was not Severance, whatever. It doesn't matter. So anyway, but this is my point, is you kind of, you know, Hollywood for a very long time was very intelligent in creating a human connection between not just you and the viewer and the character on screen, but the viewer and the actor. And that's kind of gone. Kind of, you know, I mean, they're still rolling, you know, like Ryan Reynolds, you know, so insightfully and humorously said in Deadpool and Wolverine, about Hugh Jackman, saying, you know, they're going to make you keep playing this role until you're like 80. You know what I mean? That being Wolverine. And yeah, that's certainly going on, where all of these quote unquote leading men from the past are still having to be in various roles or whatever. But there's nobody young who would be in a, you know, less expensive production like War of the Rohirrim that I think most of us would recognize, that most of the people who would deeply care about Lord of the Rings would really recognize. And so I think there's a loss of connection there, and it makes the movie feel lesser unconsciously. And I don't think a lot of people are picking up on that either. You know, and what do we do about that? Do you reset your expectation on that sort of thing? Yeah, I guess you can do that. You can recognize it, but still, that's something that's ultimately not a fail on you. That's a fail on Hollywood's part to develop, you know, kind of that two-way street of connection, you know, between you and the actor. So, you know, that's something to keep in mind that I don't think a lot of people, you know, really notice. In fact, I've never, other than, you know, and Paul Stanley's point wasn't even what I'm making. So I'm saying I've never heard anybody talk about this, that we actually have a loss of connection because there's no like real stars that we kind of generally, you know, follow from movie to movie, show to show, whatever, you know, in less highly produced projects like War of the Rohirrim. You know, yes, there's still movies where they bring in the big actors, they bring in whatever, you know, and even those suck. So clearly, you know, you know, the name attraction isn't everything, but I do think it's a part of it that not a lot of people describe. So, okay, let's wrap this up. Lord of the Rings, War of the Rohirrim. Absolutely, you should watch it once, at least. Okay? I don't think there's enough meat on the bones to go for a second round. So honestly, I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10, but you know, it's part of a larger franchise. Okay. And it does add, in my opinion, it does add a lot of color to the larger franchise. And so I almost want to give it at least another point for that and give it a 7 out of 10. But at the same time, I have a movie that that really only works once, that's really only worth watching once, it's hard to give that a high rating, you know? I mean, it's the same reason I can't fucking stand M. Night Shyamalan films. It's like, man, you know, a great movie has to make me want to come back over and over and over again. And, you know, none of his movies have ever made me want to come back over and over and over again. In fact, in general, they just disappoint me in the end, kind of like Unbreakable and others. But regardless, War of the Rohirrim Rohirrim. War of the Rohirrim did not disappoint me, but my expectations were also exceptionally low. You know, I didn't know what to expect with this necessarily. And again, it did add, I liked the movie more after watching the Lord of the Rings trilogy again after seeing that film. Because again, it added so much context to just, you know, all kinds of lines that were spoken, like I said, especially in the Two Towers. So for that, I'm not going to do 5 out of 10. I'm not going to give it like a negative score by any means. Okay. I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. And I do recommend at least watching it once. And if you want the really great experience, like do a full rewatch of the entire Lord of the Rings franchise. Okay. Extended editions and all. And I think you'll see that this movie actually does play nicely with a ton of flaws, but it does play very nicely with that larger experience. But like I said, is this just, you know, a quick cash grab and a way to keep a contract for New Line Cinemas? Yep, 100%. No doubt about that. That's what this is about. I don't want there to be any confusion on that. That is a fact of life. Okay? All right. I'm going to wrap it up for this one. Got some other very interesting reviews to come. In fact, it is planned, I'll drop this here, it is planned for Robin Freebeard, Mrs. Sovryn, and myself to do a full review of Dune Prophecy, which we all watched. And, well, I don't want to spoil anything on that, but get ready for that one. And, of course, lots of other classic Sovryn goodness to come, and I will see all of you, on the other side.